Hello, everyone. I am Jonathan Little, and today we are going to be discussing 10 critical mistakes that you must fix before the World Series of Poker. These are mistakes that a lot of poker tournament players make, and I want to make sure you are not making these mistakes. So, buckle up. Let's get right to it. If you all can hear me, if you all are in the chat, please type something there so I know we are live. All right. Recognize the World Series of Poker is right around the corner. I'm getting excited for it. Everybody else is too. It is the biggest poker tournament series in the world, and every summer, tons of players come for the huge fields, high pressure, and a chance at glory. They want to get that bracelet. So today, you're going to learn some pre-flop and post-flop leaks you must fix if you want to have any chance of success. We'll also discuss some common mindset flaws. We'll also discuss how to manage tilt and variance that you are certain to encounter when you are at the World Series of Poker. And then finally, how to focus on playing great and actually trying to maximize your expected value rather than simply sneaking in the money and min cashing. Fixing any of these mistakes will be an immediate booster to your return on investment. Mistake number one is playing too many hands too early. I recognize it's exciting to play in the World Series of Poker. And when you're given 250 big blinds to start the tournaments or more, it feels like it's no big deal to play loose and splash around and try to make the nuts. But in reality, you need to make a point on focusing on playing tight, aggressive, deep stacked poker. Really making a point to leverage the times where you're in position or you have the initiative and you want to be playing hands that have the potential to make the nuts. A lot of tournament players get in trouble early in these very deep stacked World Series of Poker events because they have a hand like King Jack offsuit and they raise and three people call and it comes Jack 7-6 and they bet and get raised and they think, oh, top pair, top kicker. That's the nuts. I'm all in. If you got me beat, you got me beat. Without recognizing when they bet three big blinds on the flop and someone raises to 10, then they rip it in for 250 or whatever iteration it goes into the pot. King Jack's no good there. And you're going to be crushed basically every time unless your opponent's absolutely bonkers. Now, you will run into some players who are absolutely bonkers, and you need to prepare to play against them. But for the most part, when a ton of money goes in the pot, you need to make a point to have a very premium hand. And top pair is really good when you're playing 30 big blinds deep, but it's not so good when you are 200 big blinds deep. Also, what a lot of players do very wrong is they play too splashy pre-flop, trying to make a good hand. They bleed away their stack. Someone will raise, someone will call, someone will call, someone will call. They'll call with 9-6 offsuit and try to flop two pair or three of a kind or a straight. And every once in a while they do. And to be fair, if they are consistently watching all their opponents splash around, every once in a while, some of them do as well. And they think, oh, I need to be playing loose like that. And that's clearly a good strategy. Without realizing, when you don't hit the flop, you're just bleeding away a ton of money. And on top of that, you have to count on someone at the table blindly paying you off. And while some people will blindly pay you off, a lot of people will not. And that's going to result in your stack just slowly getting chipped down. And that's going to become even worse and worse as you get shallower stacked. Because if you're calling 2.5 big blind raises with a 9-6 offsuit, you're just not going to win. I recognize it's fun to try to splash around and see if you make a hand. But that is not how you win against people who are trying to win at poker. This is not what you do. Instead, you have to focus on tight, aggressive, deep stack strategies, focusing on position, initiative, and hands that have the potential to make super duper premium hands that can happily get 250 big blinds in the pot. If anyone can type in something in the chat or the questions box, that would be good. So I know that you all here. I see some thumbs up, but I want this to be interactive. If you have any questions, I want you to be able to ask as you go along. So feel free to type those in. Mistake number two is playing too passively pre-flop. Not only are people too splashy, they also don't 3-bet or re-raise nearly often enough. 3-betting is very powerful. It allows you to take the initiative, which means if no one flops something and you bet, you're probably going to win. Next, it allows you to isolate weak players. Being able to play heads up, ideally in position against a weak player, is very beneficial. It also lets you play larger pots in position because you're re-raising, often in position, with, very importantly, an uncapped range. In these scenarios, you're going to be re-raising with all your best hands and then also some bluffs. But the fact that you can have all of the best hands, like aces, kings, queens, jacks, etc., and your opponents cannot because they would have 4-bet them, allows you to apply a lot of pressure after the flop. And it just generally lets you develop an aggressive image. If you consider when you're playing at the poker table, you are far more likely to be inclined to pay off players who are raising and re-raising a decent amount compared to players who sit there and only just call. Imagine you play for 2 hours and someone only just calls raises. Then all of a sudden someone raises and they 3-bet. Well, they probably just have a good hand. It's not rocket science here. If someone is very, very tight, or at least tight when it comes to re-raising, when they re-raise, they probably love their hand. And in that scenario, you can either call with hands that are getting the right implied odds to try to beat that player's very strong hand, like aces, kings, queens, or ace-king, or just fold. I mean, it's a disaster for someone if, say, you raise with ace-jack, and then they 3-bet, and you can just easily fold because you know you're completely crushed and you're not getting the right implied odds. That's not good. But if someone is 3-betting a decent amount of the time, ace-jack becomes far closer. So let's take a look at a few game theory optimal pre-flop strategies here. Here is the button strategy facing a cutoff 2.5 big blind raise, 100 big blinds deep. Okay? So in this scenario, the cutoff raises to 2.5 and we are on the button 100 big blinds deep. Take a look at what is 3-betting. This is from peakgto.com, by the way. Check it out. In this scenario, the hands that are very good, aces, kings, queens, jacks, ace, king, and ace, queen suited, 3-bet to about 8.8 big blinds the vast majority of the time, which makes sense. These hands are great, right? But then look what else is 3-betting. We have some suited aces and suited kings and suited connectors and some offsuit high cards that have decent blockers, like ace-jack, ace-10, ace-9, king-jack, king-10, queen-jack, queen-10, and jack-10 sometimes. Also some small and medium pairs 3-bet every once in a while. But notice what is not 3-betting all that often. Suited Broadway hands that are not really, really good do a whole lot of calling. So suited aces, suited kings, some low suited connectors, and some low pairs. These hands call the vast majority of the time. That said, take a look at what is 3-betting. In this spot, the game theory optimal strategy 3-bets about 11.5% of the time, but most people literally only 3-bet something like 10s and better, ace-queen suited and better, and ace-king offsuit. And then a few bluffs. And that results in them 3-betting something like 7% of the time instead of 11.5%. That means they can be 3-betting way more often in a profitable manner. And to make things even worse, very often when someone raises and you 3-bet, they're going to fold too often compared to the GTO strategy. They are going to overfold in this situation, and that will allow you to 3-bet even more often. Because if they're going to overfold and on top of that not 4-bet often enough, that's going to result in you running them over completely. And so you want to make a point to perhaps 3-bet even more than this. A lot of these hands that are just generally erring towards 3-bet, like let's say king 8 suited, king 7 suited, king 10 offsuit, ace 10 offsuit, etc., I would just 3-bet these close to 100% of the time. Because when you 3-bet these and get 4-bet, you can just easily fold, right? And if you 3-bet these and get called, very often your opponents, if anything, they're going to be calling perhaps with hands that should not necessarily be calling. They may call stuff like king 10 offsuit, queen 10 offsuit, etc. And hands like ace 10 offsuit completely dominate them. So that makes 3-betting these blocker bluffs or, just general hands with high cards that have some potential very, very good. So get in there and do not be afraid to 3-bet. From out of position, here's a small blind facing a 3 big blind or 2.5 big blind button raise 100 big blinds deep. Notice you're 3-betting almost everything you plan to play. Consider how most people play in most live poker tournaments when the button raises. The small blind, at least in my experience, and probably yours too, mostly calls. Sure, they 3-bet maybe ace-jack and better, king-queen, pocket 9s and better, but take a look at what they are not 3-betting with most of the time. They're usually not 3-betting all of these hands that are pretty good. Queen 10 suited, ace 8 suited, 10 8 suited, 7 6 suited, king jack offsuit, queen jack offsuit, king 10 offsuit, jack 10 offsuit, etc. Most players call these pretty much every time. And look, calling's better than folding, but that doesn't mean it's the right play. In this spot, if the button makes it 2.5, you can make it 11.3. A pretty big multiple, right? About 4.25 times their initial raise. And that's going to result, actually 4.5 times their initial raise even. And that's going to result in them folding out probably more often than they should. And even if they do call, recognize that your re-raising range is still very strong, right? I mean, it's pretty much just the top 17-ish% of hands, right? It's a relatively linear range in the spot. So by 3-betting with hands like this, you're going to just win more pots pre-flop, which may not seem like a huge success, but recognize you win, what is it, five big blinds by 3-betting, because you win the 2.5 from the button, and then the small blind, the big blind, and the ante. So by 3-betting to 11.3 in the spot, you're just going to run people over and just scoop up these 5 big blind pots over and over and over again. And sure, you're going to get called. You're going to have to play post-flop sometimes, but your range is good. And, I mean, you're going to play good, reasonable post-flop poker. Now, some people may say, but I'm bad at post-flop poker, so I want to avoid these spots. Well, first things first, you have a few months for the World Series of Poker, so get in there and study. But you have to get comfortable playing post-flop. That is part of the game. And it's especially part of the game in the early stages of World Series of Poker tournaments. Can I hide the bottom part of the screen? Not today. Sorry. It's either that or show a tiny PowerPoint on another screen. It looks like you can see the screen perfectly fine. All right. Mistake number 3 is not adjusting to stack sizes. A lot of players have a huge mental game leak where if they lose half their stack early, they start feeling short stacked. And they think that once they get short, they either need to double up to get back to where they started or go broke and re-enter. That is a horrible mindset. I cannot tell you how many players I see on a regular basis playing a 30 big blind stack like it's a 10 big blind stack just because it's early and other players have more chips than them. Recognize, sometimes you're going to lose chips early in a tournament. It happens. Say someone raises and you 3-bet and they call and you continuation bet the flop and you don't have anything and they call you or raise you. And you're just going to be done with the hand and you're going to lose 15 or 20 big blinds. And say that happens 3 or 4 times in a row. Sometimes that will happen 3 or 4 times in a row. You got to stay present, control your emotions, and play your shallowish stack, like 30 big blind stack or any chip stack, to the best of your ability. Recognize that poker chips will flow back your direction far more often than not. And that's especially true when you're playing relatively short stacked compared to your opponents. Because if your opponents are all playing 100 big blinds deep, but you're playing 25 big blinds deep, well, that's going to allow you to play a very different strategy that takes advantage of the fact that they are raising with a range that does well against 100 big blind stacks, but not 25 big blind stacks. This is actually a very profitable spot for you. But a lot of people blunder in this situation because they think they have to get back even or something like that. But that thought process is asinine and it will result in you just spewing off chips and money. And the fact that you can re-enter in some of these tournaments should not really impact your strategy too much at all, especially in the early or middle stages when you're not even near the end of the re-entry period. Let's take a look at a few charts here. So in this scenario, here we have small blind strategy facing a button, 2.3 big blind raise, 60 big blinds deep. Notice, by the way, we just looked at 100 for the similar spot. Now we do a little bit more calling, but still a lot of 3-betting, right? Notice we're 3-betting 8s and better, ace jack suited and better, ace queen offsuit and better, some blocker bluffs, suited aces, suited connectors, etc. Similar stuff, but a little bit splashier with the marginal suited hands and pairs. However, what happens if you get down to 25 big blinds? Now this chart starts to look very different. Notice in this scenario, we are now going all in. That's the dark red color. 14% of the time when we're 25 big blinds deep. It's a very different strategy. Now you may say, how can I be expected to memorize all these strategies? Well, hate to break it to you. Before the flop, you need to have a rough idea of what these charts look like. If you're very far off, if this is new to you, you need to study a lot. We have charts at pokercoaching.com and peakgto.com. And we have quiz features and trainers that will help you go through and play these spots over and over and over again so that you roughly know what they look like. And certainly you don't need to know that King 10 suited goes all in, whatever this is, 72% of the time and calls the rest. That's overkill. That is not necessary. But you do need to know King 10 suited isn't folding and it's not calling every time and it's not re-raising small very often at all, if ever, right? You got to practice, which is good because you have a few months before the World Series. So anyway, 25 big blinds deep. Notice we are shoving the low suited ace-X. It's a lot of suited Broadway hands, pocket 10s and lower, and ace-king down to ace-7, give or take. We're 3-betting small with all the best hands. They can 3-bet and get it in, plus a few blocker bluffs. And then we're calling hands that don't mind calling and seeing the flop, mainly the weaker suited high cards and a few of the offsuit high card hands, plus a little bit of slow playing aces and kings. Okay, fine, good. Recognize this is a 25 big blind strategy. Very often, if you lose down to 25 big blinds, this is where you're going to be, and you're going to need to know how to play the spot well. But this is what a lot of people do instead. They think, I'm just going to go all in or fold. I'm going to rip it in. My opponents think I'm on tilt, so I'm going to go crazy. And maybe that's a reasonable assessment, maybe it's not. But take a look at how different this chart is when you're 15 big blinds deep in the small blind facing a button raise compared to this chart. Very, very different, right? There's a lot of small 3-betting and calling that you should be doing 25 big blinds deep. But so many players think that their only options are all in or fold. But it clearly is not. In this scenario, you should actually be re-raising or calling about 12.5% of the time. Almost half the time you plan to play this pot, you're calling or re-raising non-all-in. But instead, they just rip it in. And they think, okay, how bad could it be? And look, it's better than, calling every single hand or whatnot, but you need to study a little bit more. You need to be a little bit more precise. If you are consistently playing farther from GTO than your opponents, you're not going to win. Unless you're making perfectly optimal adjustments to your opponents, and that's very, very hard to do because your opponents are often not using strategies that are quite so clear to you. Speaking of that, number 4, you must make a point to adjust to table dynamics. The World Series of Poker brings out a variety of players, a whole bunch of them. Some of these players are going to play crazy. Some are going to play loose. Some players just want to go there and play their general poker strategy. But if you go there and show up and only play the same strategy against everyone, you're going to be leaving a ton of money on the table. Recognize that when you are at a table that is mostly featuring tight players, you're going to want to raise first in pretty wide. You're going to want to attack them with lots of small, frequent bets. But then, when the pot gets big and they want to start playing for lots of money, you're going to want to drastically overfold because their range should be very, very strong because they're playing tight strategies, right? Alternatively, at loose tables, you need to sit there and play disciplined. You don't want to get too crazy. You do need to 3-bet wider than normal because their ranges are far wider than normal and they'll call wider than normal. But you want to just 3-bet wider for value. You're going to want to punish these players with your value hands. Whereas if you take a look at a chart like, let's say this earlier, notice how like ace-10 suited calls every time on the button versus a cutoff raise. Against a loose, splashy, crazy player, like ace-9 suited can even happily 3-bet and go post-flop. Because when they call you, they're going to be calling with all sorts of weak stuff, right? So you want to 3-bet less often with bluffs against loose, crazy players and 3-bet more often for value, assuming you think they're going to call you far too often. Let's take a look at some examples. Here we have a spot where we are playing 100 big blinds deep early in the Millie Maker. Last year, this is a hand where a tight player raises in the hijack seat. We call in the big blind. You may say, should we 3-bet this? Well, check out peak GTO for this. But this is a spot where, in general, we are going to want to 3-bet some, call some. You can mix it up. But against a tight player, always call. Because the tight player is probably raising a stronger range than normal. And that's going to result in a lot of your good but non-premium hands that are not happy to play against a 4-bet. These hands are going to instead want to just call and play cautiously. King 10-4, we check. They bet small. Against a normal player, this is probably good enough to check raise and just play for a lot of money. Some chunk of the time. Calling, of course, is fine too. But against a tight player, you just want to call. Take it easy. Take it easy. Turn to 8 of spades. We check again. They bet again. This time, pot. All right. At this point, our hand is starting to shrivel up. Yes, we have a flush draw. We're never folding. If we did not have a flush draw, I'd probably also call again here too, but I would hate it far more, of course, because now we at least have a draw to the flush. But anytime a tight, aggressive player or especially a tight, passive player, wants to put in a lot of money on the turn, this is a spot where you need to shrivel up or tighten up a lot because you are going to be against a very strong range. Now, you may say, my opponent will bluff sometimes here, though, with like Queen Jack and Ace Jack and Ace Queen. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Recognize we have that queen in our hand, which blocks a lot of those. We also block the flush draws hard, so we need them to be really getting out of line. And at that point, would we even classify them as a tight player? In my experience, a lot of tight players are only bluffing in the spot with hands like Queen Jack or Jack 9 suited if they have it. And there just aren't that many combinations of that when you compare the value hands they could have that they'll always bet, like Ace King, Pocket Kings, Pocket Tens, King 10, right? Maybe Pocket Eights, Pocket Fours. So they have a lot of combinations of very strong value hands. And there's no guarantee they're going to bluff with all the bluffs. So just call. River's a 9. We check. They almost potted again. How do we feel about this one? Type it in the comment section. Get involved. I'm here for all of you today. This is a spot where, at this point, against a loose, splashy, crazy player, yeah, I'd call pretty much every time. But that's not who we're against. We're against a tight player who's not messing around. So if you're against a tight player who is not messing around, this is a spot where we instead should simply fold. I know it's annoying to fold top pair second kicker. It's not really what you're trying to do. But especially on this 9 river, our hand is just way worse. Because now we do lose to one of the most obvious bluffs. And on top of that, if the opponent did have a hand like Jack 9, there's no guarantee they would bluff with that because they just paired up and they can maybe check it behind and beat Ace Queen, Ace Jack, busted flush draws, etc. So for that reason, I think this is just a pretty easy fold. Now, if the river was not a 9, this would be a more difficult spot. However, I think it's probably still just okay to fold if you think the opponent will not value bet. Say the river was a 2, right? If you think they'll value bet King 9, then it starts to become kind of close to a call. But if they're not bluffing all that often, and you don't think they'll run a big bluff on the river, even if they did have busted Queen Jack or Ace Jack, I mean, what are you really beating, right? I mean, you're beating King Jack. That's about it, right? Because you lose to King 10, you beat King 9. They may not even have the King 9 offsuit, and you're blocking it hard anyway with the King. So it's kind of hard to find all that many hands that you beat that would value bets, right? So if we lose all the bluffs, we lose all the value hands, or most of the value hands, and we beat all the bluffs, but the opponent probably won't bluff often enough, you should just be folding in these spots. Let it go. Let's take a look at another spot. Ace 8. This time we have a young, aggressive kid in the cutoff, raising 60 big blinds deep. We can call the Ace 8 in the big blind. Flop comes Jack 8-5. We check. They bet. Kind of big. Definitely not folding. You don't want to raise in this spot because if you raise and get called or re-raise, again, your hand is just not that good. We have a very clear medium strength hand at this point. Turns another Jack. We check. They bet again. 3-4 spot. This is another very easy call. If you put me in this scenario against any young, loose, aggressive, splashy kid, I'm going to call every time because if you consider the value hands they could have, it's really only, pocket 9s and better? So any Jack, pocket 5s, pocket 9s and better. There's not that many combinations of those. But if you consider the bluffs they could have a ton of bluffs, right? Any King high and worse is going to feel somewhat inclined to bluff. A lot of those have gut shots or open-endeds or flush draws or overcards or whatnot. So they all have outs. But this is a spot where we want to keep the opponent in with their 6 outs or whatever it is. Because if they do get to the river with King high or worse, they're going to feel pretty inclined to bluff on the river. So this is a great spot to call. You may say, why not shove and make them fold their draws? Because when they do call you, you're going to be drawing thin or dead. In spots like this where you're either way ahead or way behind, if your opponent will bluff on the river some chunk of the time, it's pretty much always better to just call. Unless you have almost no chips behind. Like say we had 24K instead of 52, then you'd probably just want to shove because then you deny them their chance to draw, and you're only going to get 12K more out of them on the river if you just call. And they may not even bluff anyway, because they're going to think you feel pot committed. Here, though, they can easily continue bluffing on the river because they have 40K, and there's 40K remaining in the pot. River's a 3, we check. No matter what they do, I'm calling. Call. And look, sometimes they are going to have you beat here. Very often, they're going to have you beat here. But recognize you only need to be good about 1/3 of the time. We have to put in 40 to try to win 120. 40 divided by 120 is 33%. So if we are going to win this more than 33% of the time, we're going to profit by calling. And sure, there are tournament dynamics where you don't want to go broke, especially when you're nearing the money bubble or anything like that. But if you put me in this spot in pretty much any scenario, I'm just going to be happy to call because we probably win 50% of the time, maybe more in the spot if the kid is overly aggressive. Very, very easy call here. But this is a spot I see a lot of players post hands on YouTube or whatnot. They're like, okay, well, they bet the flop and the turn in the river, so they probably have it, so I'm going to fold. And then they just bleed away a third of their stack. And they do it over and over and over again. You can't go around bleeding away a third of your stack, especially with one of the best hands in your range. They have the 10-9. Very logical. Don't make folds in spots like that. All right, mistake number 5 is not choosing bluffing hands wisely. Bluffing in the World Series of Poker is different than game theory optimal bluffing because instead of identifying the correct bluffing hands and combinations, you instead want to identify the correct bluffing spots. Essentially, you want to bluff more often when you cover your opponent and you can put their entire tournament life at risk. In those scenarios at the World Series of Poker where people fly across the country to play 1 or 2 or 3 tournaments, they're not trying to go broke with some big hero call. Kind of like that previous hand I just showed you. A lot of people just fold that ace-8. Now, take the ace-8 scenario and make it a little bit less extreme. What if they had 8-7? A lot of players are way more inclined to fold 8-7, but in reality, those hands are very similar, right? But a lot of people look at the 8-7 and think, oh, I'm not going to go broke with an 8-7 pre-flop or an 8-7. My opponent could beat me with all sorts of stuff without realizing ace-8 and 8-7 are pretty much the same thing. And it's a spot where a lot of people fold. And they didn't fly across the country to make second pair and check call down with it. That's not how they're going to end their tournament event, right? That's just not what they do. So you're going to want to bluff more often in spots where you can really put your opponent's entire stack at risk. That said, you're going to want to bluff less often if your opponent's already invested a ton of money in the pot, or if they cover you and it doesn't really impact their stack too much if they make the call. That's going to be the case if, let's say, you do lose down to a third of your stack early. They may think you're on tilt, and then you make a logical bluffing hand, and you decide to go for it. But if your opponent check calls the flop in the turn and they're getting good odds to call the river, they're not going to fold the second pair because they think you might be crazy, and they're going to feel kind of pot committed. Even if they lose, they still have 2/3 of their stack left, right? So it's not a big deal. They're going to call you off. That's a bad spot to bluff. In pokercoaching.com, in the tournament and cash game masterclass, we have this bluffing decision flowchart. This is how you go about identifying good spots to bluff. This does not necessarily say it's a game theory optimal bluff, but these are good spots where bluffing is usually pretty recommended. So, start at the top of the chart. Is my opponent capable of folding? Some people are, some people aren't. Some people don't fold all that often. If you give them any ace high or better, they're calling. If they're calling any ace high or better, don't bluff. If they're capable of folding, though, if they'll fold, well, that second pair like we just showed, that's a great spot to bluff. Next, do you lack showdown value? Do you have a hand like ace-king that can beat busted draws? Or do you have something like 10-9, a busted straight draw that cannot beat anything? If you can't beat anything, you should be way more inclined to bluff. If you can beat stuff, you should be way more inclined to not bluff. Next, you have a lot of value hands in your range. Are there a lot of hands you would logically play in this manner that are very strong? If that's the case, be more inclined to bluff. If not, be less inclined to bluff. Are your blockers highly relevant? This is going to be the case when, let's say, like 3 to a flush comes on the river and you have the ace or king of that suit, but no showdown value otherwise. They have like ace-2 with the ace of that suit, but nothing else. In that spot, you want to feel pretty inclined to bluff. If your blockers are not relevant, you should be less inclined to bluff. Because when you don't block your opponent's hands that will automatically call the all-in, it makes it more likely they have those hands, right? Like if you know you have the nut flush blocker, they just can't have the nut flush, and that takes away a lot of their auto call combinations. Alternatively, do you unblock your opponent's auto folds? This is essentially the opposite of this. If they will automatically fold, well, let's say, middle pair, middle kickers, having those middle kickers may be relevant. Does your bluff tell a credible story? Is this just how they think you would play a strong hand? If this is how they think you'd play a strong hand, be more inclined to bluff. If not, be less inclined to bluff. Okay, once we've decided to bluff, we have to decide what bet sizing we should use. Because quite often, you're not just all in. Sometimes you're all in. If you have something like pot or left on the river in position, you're probably just going to be all in. But say you do have 2 times pot on the river. You may want to have a small bet like half pot, and maybe a bigger bet like pot, and maybe a big bet like all in, or maybe just half pot and all in. So when determining your size, do you have no showdown value whatsoever? Say you have like the nut low busted flush draw that you decided to bluff. Let's just pretend that. Say you have 4-3 or something, and flop was king 5-2 with 2 of your suits. So you have a straight flush draw, but it bricks off. No showdown value at all. You probably want to bet large. If you have some showdown value, you may want to be betting small. Say you have like the king high, or not, it's not king 5-2. Say you have the queen high, or maybe even the ace high somehow, like ace 4. That's a hand that if you do decide to bluff, maybe you want to bet smaller, because every once in a while, not very often, but every once in a while, they call you with a worse hand. This also will help you naturally split your bluffs into small and big sizes, assuming you're trying to be somewhat balanced, because if you only bluff big, well, then that makes your small bets way too value heavy. And if you only bluff small, it makes your big bets way too value heavy, and that may or may not be good depending on your scenario. Next, does your opponent likely have a lot of marginal made hands in their range? Essentially, do they have a whole lot of nuts that will call your all in, or a whole lot, or that will call your bet, or a whole lot of marginal hands like top pair that will call your big bet, that will call your bet? If they have a lot of top pair type hands, you want to apply maximum pressure. Because top pair is good, but it's not super premium by the river, right? So if they have a lot of medium strength hands, meaning they're essentially capped, when they're capped, you usually want to bet huge. And that is what we're doing here. But if they don't have a lot of marginal hands, but instead they either have nothing, like a busted draw, or a good hand, like a flush, in that scenario, you want to bet small. Because there's no point in betting huge if your opponent has a flush or nothing, right? Because if they have nothing, they're going to fold to a small bet. And if they have a flush, they're never going to fold. So if they're more likely to be capped with a lot of medium strength hands, you usually want to bet big. And if they're more likely to be uncapped with a lot of garbage, you usually want to bet small. Next, do you block many nut hands, which again caps your opponent, right? If you block the nuts, this is a spot where you want to be betting big. If you do not block the nuts, meaning they could have it, that's usually a reason to bet smaller, because when they could just be sitting there with the nuts, they're obviously not going to fold that, and you want to lose the minimum amount required in those scenarios. Are you just generally trying to get your opponent off a strong hand? Are you trying to make them fold top pair, top kicker, or pocket aces on a 3 flush, 3 straight board? Well, if you bet half pot, they're probably just going to call. But if you bet 2 times the size of the pot, that's how you're going to get them to fold. Again, if your opponent will never fold aces, though, on a 3 straight 3 flush board, don't bluff to begin with. Next, are you representing a nut hand? Are you saying, I have the nuts? Did you take a polarized line where maybe you raise them on the flop, betting it on the turn, shove the river, or bet the river? In that scenario, if you're representing a nut hand, you usually want to bet big. If you're representing a thinner value hand, like say you raise pre-flop, they call, you bet the flop, they call, turn goes check, check. Down the river, they check. In that spot, you're representing hands like top pair, which is not a nutted hand. When you're not representing a nutted hand, you usually want to bet smaller. Okay? I know this is a lot. Take a screenshot, memorize this, because this bluffing decision flowchart is how I go about thinking about determining when to bluff in pretty much all scenarios when I'm not just trying to play good, strong, perfect GTO poker. And to be fair, good, strong GTO poker often does even look kind of like this bluffing decision flowchart, because you're considering, do I have relevant blockers or unblockers or whatnot? So definitely make a point to choose your bluffing spots wisely, not necessarily your specific bluffing hands. Because in GTO world, sometimes you'll find a hand that just bluffs every time, but if your opponent's not folding, don't bluff it. Next, a lot of players make the mistake of playing poorly on the bubble. ICM and payout implication strategy is very important at the World Series of Poker, especially near the bubble. And that's because a lot of players at the World Series of Poker really want to get in the money. At almost every bracelet event you play, when you get in the money, players will celebrate and clap and cheer, even though they just 1.5x their money. They think they succeeded. They think they won. They're in the money. They're relieved. Now they can get back to playing poker. But in reality, 1.5xing your money is nothing to be proud of, at least in my opinion. I realize people want to get a cash on the Hendon mob or have a World Series cash or whatever. They want a story. They're not playing to try to win the tournament. They're playing for a story. But to make good money at poker and to win the bracelets, you got to be playing for more than just a story of going to Vegas and getting a minimum cash. So the most important thing you need to be doing near the money bubble is classifying the players at your table. You're going to find that, let's say 15% of the players get in the money. Maybe when 25% of the players remain, some players are like rocking it up. They are going to be super nitty and they are going to get in the money no matter what. They may be sitting there with, 12 starting stacks. They just decide, I'm going to pretty much blind out. Sure, they'll still play the top 10% of hands, but they're not going to be getting in any substantial pot without a hand they think is going to win almost every time. Other players don't care about getting in the money at all, which is kind of funny, right? You have some players that care about the money a lot, some don't care at all. But if your opponent doesn't care about getting in the money at all, well, then that changes your strategy a lot too. One time on the bubble in a $1,500 tournament, it folded to me on the button. I had a lot of chips. I've been pushing everyone around. I'm an all-in, as I should do with any two cards in this scenario. My opponent immediately called with 9-2 offsuit for about 9 big blinds. He was fed up. I had the 10-6 offsuit. He looked at me and said, I knew you were bluffing. I caught you. I mean, like, okay, you got me. His 9-2 did not win, and I won the pot with 10 high, and he bubbled. But he was happy as can be because he knew I was bluffing, but he forgot that his hand mattered. And that player, for whatever reason, decided all of a sudden he was tired of me pushing him around. He developed some story in his head. He's going to catch Jonathan Little bluffing on the bubble. He's going to show me. And that was the end of the thought process. And he bubbled, and I'm not sure. I don't even know what's happening with that guy. I hope he taught himself a lesson, but I kind of doubt that's the case. But look, some players are going to be crazy. Some people are going to be tight. But if you can identify the players who are tight on the bubble, you're going to absolutely crush them. The most profitable time to increase your aggression is nearing the money bubble. When you are down to 25-ish% of the field and you start identifying players who are just kind of playing a little too tightly, you're going to want to look for more spots to be aggressive, especially for non-all-in amounts of money. So you're going to want to raise more often from, let's say, the button. Let's say you normally raise the button 45-ish% of the time in a scenario. Maybe make it 55% if the players in the blinds are tight. Or maybe if the button raises, or the cutoff raises, let's look at this. Let's say the cutoff raises and we are deep stack for whatever reason. If you think they're going to be kind of tight against your aggression because they don't want to battle the two big stacks, maybe you start 3-betting way more often than this. If you're 3-betting normally 11%, maybe you make it more like 15% or 18%, right? You're going to want to look for spots to just apply more aggression because people are going to be raising, or some people are going to be raising too wide, but then really tightening up when other people fight back. Recognize that chipping up in this stage is what will help you run deep far more often. So many times nearing the bubble, I've gone from an average stack to a 2x average stack just by raising more often than I quote unquote should, having people fold a little bit too often or call too often pre-flop and then check fold the flop. And then you just slowly win these 4 or 5 big blind pots. If you win a bunch of 4 or 5 big blind pots for about an hour, that adds a ton of chips, especially if the average stack in that scenario is like 30 big blinds. You can easily go from 30 to 60 if you just win twice as many of these spots as you would have normally. And sure, every once in a while you are going to chip down and things aren't going to go well and you're going to go from 30 down to 15. But then you just sneak in the money, collect your min cash, and move on with your life. That's okay. It's not always going to go perfectly. Sometimes you're going to bubble. Sometimes as a middle stack or a big stack on the bubble, you will end up bubbling. I've bubbled my fair share of tournaments. I mean, heck, in the last 20 tournaments, I think I've roughly bubbled about 5 of them. And I'm happy with my play. I would have done it all the same again. Because again, getting in the money, collecting a 1.5 buy-in minimum cash is not how you win at poker tournaments. There are times where you should sneak in the money when you're usually one of the shallower stacks. But if you have a middle stack or a big stack, you need to be trying to accumulate chips so that you can then use those chips to carry you to the final table and eventually the victory. Mistake number 7 is not getting paid off with your big hands. You need to stop slow playing your very premium hands, especially against players who are generally weaker, who aren't going to be running too many big bluffs against you, or who aren't going to be betting too often when checked to. You need to build the pot and go for large amounts of value with your big hand because they're not going to put the money in the pot for you. You also need to stop worrying so much if it's a game theory optimal play, because very often the game theory optimal strategy slow plays with very, very good hands because it knows that the opponent is more likely to have nothing, and if the opponent's more likely to have nothing, it's going to make them more likely to bluff. But a lot of your opponents in the world stage of poker aren't going to be running huge bluffs. They're just not going to do it. So you instead need to think, what is the most I can bet in this spot that my opponent will call me with their most likely calling hands? So like if you're sitting there with the nuts, whatever it is, and you think your opponent most likely has top or middle pair, you want to bet an amount that they will call with top or middle pair. Don't go for a huge 3x pot all in, because that's what GTO does in some scenarios. Don't go for a 10% pot bet, because that's also what GTO does in some scenarios. You just need to think, if they most likely have top pair or middle pair, how much will they call with that? 2/3 pot, half pot, something like that. Figure it out and go for it, right? Stop slow playing though. Let's take a look at some examples. Here we have a raise. We call the nines. It comes queen 9-4. We check. They bet. I can already tell you, I'm going to check raise this one and blast it, because a lot of players, when you check raise the flop, they are going to squarely put you on a draw or one of the few combinations of sets. And if they do happen to have a queen or an overpair or a draw, they're just not going to fold. They make it 3, we make it 12. We're going big already. A lot of people make it 7 in the spot, thinking, okay, I want to get called. You have to realize that whenever they have a draw, you don't really want them to call for 4 more, because then they're getting really, really good odds. I think 12 might be a little bit excessive against some players. If you think your opponent will fold out any like pocket pair, like pocket 10s or 9 to 12, but they'll call maybe 10, I think 10 might be better. It's a fine line. Depends on your opponent. Turns an ace. This is a spot where a lot of players check, because they think, well, if I bet, they can't call the queen anymore. And if I check and they have a draw, they're definitely going to bet, because I don't have a whole lot of ace X, right? So this is a reasonable spot to check. And in GTO world, that may actually be okay. But no. In this spot, we need to keep betting. We need to bet an amount that a queen will call, because that's most likely what they have. And if they do happen to have an ace, they're obviously not folding an ace. If they have a draw, we want to do our best to cut off the draw's odds while still getting value from the queen, because realize we could just rip it all in, right? We could go all in, but then we're only going to get called if the opponent happened to have some ace, which they're going to put money in anyway if they have an ace. And if they have a draw, yeah, we cut off the odds for the draw, but there's no guarantee they have a draw. They're as likely, or somewhere near as likely, to have a queen, right? So we really want to focus on getting value from that. River's a 7, which is great. A lot of players think here, okay, I'm going to check and give the draws a chance to bluff. But this is another spot in live poker in small stakes games where people will not bluff. Now, this is a $10,000 six-handed tournament. Against these players, I may be more inclined to give them a chance to bluff. But if you can look and tell your opponent is like interested in the pot, it probably means they have something. And if they have something, the only real logical bet here is just to put it in. We bet, they call. They had the top pair. We get money. Notice instead what would have likely happened if we checked the turn. They probably would have let it go check, check. Maybe they bet, but they probably let it go check, check. Then on the river, if I bet, the pot would be way smaller, and he would have called, of course, but I would not have stacked them. But by just continuing to apply aggression, we do our best to cut off odds from the draws, and we just get to play a big pot with our nuts. Let's take a look at another one. Pocket aces, we raise 2 callers. We flop top set. Top set in GTO world loves to slow play, but I don't think I'm ever slow playing on this board where there are 2 high cards and a flush draw, because it's very, very easy for the opponents to have a draw or even one of the other aces. So let's bet. We go 3K. I can be convinced bigger is even better. This is a $5,000 buy-in tournament. I realize a smaller bet is more of a GTO play. In the real world, I might bet even bigger against smaller buy-in tournament players. Because if they just have an ace or a draw or maybe even a jack, they're just not going to fold for 5,000 here. They both call. Turns to 2. They check. Definitely don't slow play now. Put money in the pot. We bet 13, setting up roughly a river-sized shove if they call. Something you'll very often see the best players doing is betting roughly geometric, meaning they're betting some amount now that if they do get called, they can bet roughly the same proportion of the pot later. This is a little bit of a tricky one because we are playing multi-way. But notice here, if I bet 13 and get called, the pot's going to go up to 43, and I have about pot remaining. So maybe I can bet a little bit more on the turn, but sometimes you bet and both players call, and then you have like 60% pot. What you don't want to do is you don't want to bet like 3,000 on the turn and get called, because then the pot goes up to 23, right? But then I'm going to have 50 behind, right? So then we have 2x pot behind. You don't want to go 30% pot, 200% pot. Usually that's not ideal. Anyway, 13, big blind calls, river's 4. They check. Obviously, we go all in here. We get the money. Now, the question would become, what if the river is a bad card for us, like a diamond? Do we shove on a diamond river after they check? Probably. It's a close spot. It's an annoying spot. You have to ask, will they call with an ace if I shove the river on a diamond? Some will, some won't. Maybe exploitatively, you go for half pots. Tough to say, right? If the river's a diamond and they donk it all in, this is where you got to make a read on your opponent, realize you only have to be good a third of the time. I think most people in this spot probably just going to show you the nuts in a small stakes game, and exploitatively you can make a fold. If the river's something like a 10 and they donk shove, I'm probably just going to call it off because they could be donk shoving ace 10, jack 10, etc. I realize some of the straight draws get there. If the river is any card besides a diamond, I'm definitely shoving the river though, for sure. Don't be scared of like the random 9 completing the 10-8. Definitely go for the all-in on the river, by the way. This is a spot where a lot of people think, well, they probably have a busted draw, so I want to bet a third pot and let them check shove me. Absolutely not. If you do that, what's going to happen is when they have an ace or jack or whatever, they're going to call, they're just going to call, and you're not going to stack them. Go for the shove. Don't be afraid. Got him with the 7-4 that time. Next, a big mistake a lot of players make is they get fancy instead of playing well. They get into ego battles and leveling wars that are simply unnecessary. Realize that just because some players want to get in there and try to make you angry or flustered or annoyed does not mean you have to play on that plane, on that level. The pro that you think is trying to push you around at the table is probably just playing well and running hot. Sometimes when you sit at a table, someone's going to get their fair share of or more than their fair share of the cards. And when that's the case, there's not a whole lot for you to do. Stay out of their way. I mean, gosh, probably in half of the tournaments I play, give or take, I just show up, get bad cards, kind of blind out, don't really have a whole lot going on, and I lose. And I know that a lot of people don't like that. That is their experience when they go to play. But hey, it happens. Don't think that your opponents are pushing you around or trying to bully you. I mean, look, maybe they are, but you can't do anything about it if you have bad cards. Making big hero calls that may get you on Poker News or poker.org or Card Player or whatever is also probably not a good play. Sure, sometimes these plays are going to work out, but if you see a reporter there taking notes, don't let that impact your play. That should not be something that changes your strategy. Instead, you need to stay locked in. You need to play with no ego and execute your strategy well, no matter what stage of the tournament you are in or how much pressure is on you. Realize, by the way, that pressure is also just in your head. We're playing a card game here, right? It's for quote-unquote fun. Sure, it's for money too. Sure, it's for life-changing money. But don't let the pressure bother you. Simply make every decision to the best of your ability. Mistake number 9 is tilting after bad beats. Every time you run badly at the poker table, there is a chance for you to have a massive edge compared to other players at the World Series of Poker. Why? Because they, or at least a lot of them, go on tilt and get mad and be crazy and make big mistakes. But if you instead brush that beat off and focus on what you can control and continue playing your best, you're going to have a huge edge compared to the players who instead tilt off their stack when they run poorly. One time at the World Series, someone came to my table with something like 8 starting stacks 2 hours into the day. He was crushing it. He immediately gets a pocket aces, loses some guy who had some horrible hand. I forget what it was. I think it was 9-4. 9-4 suited. I don't remember how the hand went down, but the guy lost like 2 starting stacks in that hand. So like he was annoyed. He went from 8 down to 6. He was mad. He was on tilt. He was angry. He was sitting there with like 5 times average, right? But he was mad about it. He was mad he had 5 times average early in the tournament. And he went on massive tilt. He proceeded to play every hand, and he was out within an hour, playing horribly bad because he was mad that he got bad beat. That player has almost no chance to succeed at poker unless they fix their mindset issues. That player should have recognized. I mean, I don't know how the player got their chips to begin with, but look, sometimes you're going to take bad beats. It happens. Understand, this is what you signed up for. Short-term variance is huge in large field tournaments. You're going to have to play and win a lot of hands. And I mean, if anything, be happy you had enough chips to withstand the bad beat. Embrace the fact that this is going to happen and focus on playing your best. Do not let the short-term fluctuations of poker matter to you and impact your strategy, because they're going to happen often. You're going to have swings in poker. Get used to it. If you ever look at a graph of a player's chips in tournaments, even if they do very well, the winning players like up, 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 down, down, up, 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 down, 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 up, 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 down, down, down. It's not just straight up. A lot of players think that when you do well in poker in a tournament, your graph just goes straight up. But realize a tournament may only last 500 hands or 1,000 hands. And that's not a lot. Sometimes you're going to have really, really good 500 hand stretches, sometimes bad 500 hand stretches, and everywhere in the middle. Get used to it. Don't let things out of your control bother you. Mistake number 10 is not enjoying the World Series of Poker experience. Many poker coaching students are going out to the World Series to play just a few events. This means that their results are mostly going to be based on luck. That is true for even the best players over 2 to 5 events. Every year at the highest stakes games, someone runs super duper hot over some short period of time. I mean, heck, last year was me. Look, I won this trophy right here for winning 2 out of 8 tournaments and final tabling 2 other ones over the course of, 8 tournaments. Clearly, that's super duper lucky. Was I playing above the rim that week and a half? Probably not. I was probably just running hot, right? Certainly I'm playing well. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm just going there and bumbling around. But in order to win 2 tournaments out of 8, you probably ran a little bit hot, or maybe very, very hot. And I've had stretches in my career where that's happened multiple times. I've also had stretches in my career where I've gone like 0 for 20. No cashes, no final tables, no nothing. And that's okay. Interestingly enough, you're more often to be in the bad stretches than the good stretches, because it's easier to get a bottom 85% finish than it is to get a top 1% finish, right? So you need to make sure that you are going into the World Series of Poker, or any poker series or life, with realistic expectations and enjoy the experience. Enjoy Las Vegas, enjoy playing poker, enjoy hanging out with people. Very few things are as much fun as getting out to battle at the World Series of Poker. So play your best and enjoy the experience. And if you see me, say hi, because I'm out there doing my best, having fun too. And I always like hanging out with and meeting all of you. So make a point to enjoy your WSOP experience. Please don't go out there, lose 3 tournaments, and be sad and bitter and angry and mad. I don't think that's what life is for. So that is it. Those are my 10 critical tournament mistakes you must avoid at the World Series. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in. To recap, playing too many hands early. You can't play loosey-goosey and have a sandwich. Number 2, playing too passively pre-flop is a big mistake. You need to put in 3 bets. You can't just call and see the flop and give up value with a lot of your best hands. Number 3, not adjusting to stack sizes. You must adjust to the effective stack size in the hand. Otherwise, you're just going to be using very, very incorrect strategies like we showed earlier. Number 4, not adjusting to table dynamics. Your opponents matter. You're not playing solitaire. Number 5, not choosing your bluffs wisely. Just because GTO says to bluff a hand does not mean you should bluff that hand in the real world against real opponents. Some people don't fold often enough, and you should not bluff nearly as often or ever. Other players fold way too often. Against those players, you should be bluffing far more often, even if your blockers are not so good. Next, a lot of players play poorly on the bubble. They do not make a point to chip up logically, which gives them a chance to actually win the tournament. Number 7 is not getting paid off with big hands. Number 8 is getting fancy instead of playing well. 7 and 8 kind of go hand in hand, but you need to make a point to just play good poker, right? Play good poker. And good poker against most people who are too passive is trying to get money in the pot with your big hands. Also, don't try to run fancy, intricate bluffs. Your opponents don't know what you're doing. Just play good poker. Number 9, don't go on tilt after bad beats. That is something that will make it hard for you to win at poker at all. And because your opponents are all going to be going on tilt after they go experience a bad beat, that's going to result in money flowing your direction, because every time they go on tilt and you don't, that is good for you. And finally, number 10, many players do not enjoy the World Series of Poker experience. That results in them not enjoying life and their opportunity to come out here and have a chance to win life-changing money and have a great time. That's it for today. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Good luck in your games. If you see me at the World Series, please make a point to say hi. I appreciate each and every one of you being here with me today. If you're enjoying pokercoaching.com, tell your friends. Good luck. Have fun. I'll talk to all of you next time. Bye-bye.